All right, hey everyone. This is the first of a few videos that I'm going to be making reviewing the overarching concepts that we'll find on exam 2, which is, let's see, I think it's Thursday the 24th, right? So it's going to be Thursday the 24th, and this one is going to be on the inheritance of sex-related traits, specifically sex-linked traits in the case of chapter 4, and visible inheritance that we see in the form of pedigrees. So let's begin. I highly recommend that you watch this video. Peacock spiders are really cool. But anyway, a male peacock spider successfully courts a female. In this species, the wild type codes for long leg hairs, while the mutant allele codes for short. The successful male has short hairs and the female has long hairs. Regarding their offspring, what percentage of females will have long hairs? Okay, so a good first step for answering this question, let's not write in green. A good first step for these questions is always to recognize the genotypes of our individuals. So the male, spiders, by the way, exhibit XY chromosomes. So the male is going to be X, Y. And they have short hair, and short hair is the mutant variant. So they're going to have mutant, and the female is obviously XX, and they have long hair. So two wild types, and we assume in this case that the wild type is dominant to the mutant allele. And so we can cross these two individuals, and we have the male over here with X, M, and Y, and the female with X plus, X plus. You don't have to do this. It's actually quite obvious what's going to happen, but we have this X plus coming down here, and the same here. Because, you know, the female only has one type of gamete, X plus. She has two of them, but there's only one type. And so we can cross this XM, XM. Oh, that's not right. The Y from the male. So the male can either contribute this kind of X chromosome or a Y chromosome. And so we can see in the progeny right away that anyone who has a Y chromosome is going to be a male, and anyone with two X's is going to be a female. So regarding the offspring, what percentage of females have long hair? We can obviously disregard these because having this Y chromosome in species with X and Y chromosomes makes them a male, so we can ignore them. So what percentage of females will have long hair? Long hair is wild type, it's dominant. So as long as we see the wild type, this plus and this plus, we will see a female with long hair. And so what percentage of females have long hair? Obviously, we see out of the two females, two of them have long hair. So we know, obviously, 2 divided by 2 is 100. What's happening? 100%. Now, over the overall offspring, what percentage of them have long hair? In this case, because we're looking at all of them instead of just the female, we once again look for the X plus. And so we see that all of them have this dominant wild type that will overshadow any kind of mutant allele. And we see that 100% of them actually will have long hairs. And why is this? This is because we have you're right, an X-linked dominant sex. I'm not wording that properly, but you get the point. It's X-linked dominant. If it were X-linked recessive, then none of them, well, actually, if it were X-linked recessive, then half of them would have long hair. Only the female, or excuse me, only the males would have, or I'm confusing myself. Long hair, exactly. Because if the mutant allele were the dominant phenotype, or excuse me, dominant allele, if the mutant were the dominant allele, and this long hair allele were inherited by X-linked recessive means, then obviously the mutant allele would overpower the dominant, or excuse me, wild type allele. The mutant dominant allele would overpower the wild type allele. And in the case of these females, all females would be, they would have short leg hairs because they have the mutant allele, which is dominant to the wild type allele. But in the case of the males, it's not possible for a male to have the mutant allele because only this original successful male had the mutant allele. And in order for the offspring to be male in the first place, the father would have had to give the Y. And obviously the mother, the female spider, only has the recessive, in this case, wild type allele to give. So the males would have the recessive allele and therefore the short, or excuse me, I'm sorry, the long leg hairs. So, oh, you have to stop that. Okay. So oh no, please come back. Hey. Okay, that's better. Let's choose a funky color, this one. So a peahen and a peacock hop away from their group, which is called an ostentation, to mate. These birds can grow either showy plumage or dull brown feathers being exclusive to females. What are the genotypes of these mates, this peahen and peacock? So what do we know right off the bat? Perhaps even from Dr. Wiggins' lecture that we've also talked about in the case of Komodo dragons and a lot of reptiles exhibit this kind of chromosome, some insects. We are talking about we are talking about ZW chromosome. You know, they're birds, they have ZW chromosomes. So how is that different from, for example, our spider example? In spiders, it was the male who was heterogametic. You know, these are their gametes, either the X or Y chromosome, and they are hetero because they're different. But the females have XX. They have the same gametes, and therefore they are homogametic. Remember, homo means same. But in the case of birds, reptiles, and butterflies, for example, the males are the homogametic species, and the females are heterogametic. They have different gametes. So what are the genotypes of these mates? We know that the male is going to be ZZ. That's how they become a male in the first place. And the female is going to be ZW. That's terrible. W. Brown feathers are exclusive to females. So it's not possible for a male to have these brown feathers. The males are going to become nice and bright and colorful, while the females are going to be drab and very nicely camouflaged so they can sit on a nest and not be very easily spotted. So knowing this, that it's not possible for the male genotype to code for brown feathers, what is the most likely manner of inheritance? What kind of sex linkage are we looking at? You're right, it is W-linked. And you probably won't come across that very often. What we're familiar with is Y-linked traits, because, you know, we are mammals, and mammals exhibit XY chromosome, and males are usually like this, and males can most often pass on I shouldn't say most often, but it's the common example when you're learning genetics that, it's the Y chromosome that's passed from male to male that can pass on very specific Y-linked traits. So I was kind of just adding a little bit of extra confusion to the mix. This is W, or kind of, hey, get back here. Sorry. Oh my God, no. Let me draw, please. Thank you. So kind of Y-linked. So if this pair produced 4 eggs, how many would have brown feathers? We know, for example, or excuse me, for a fact, that only females can have brown feathers. So when we're asking this question, we're also asking how many of the offspring would be female. We can do this cross very nice and easily. We have our female on top, our male on the side. That goes with that. That goes with that. This Z comes over here, and this W comes down. So having brown feathers is indicative of a female, or it signifies a female. So any females that we see are going to have brown feathers. So out of these 4, coincidentally, 2 of them are going to have brown feathers because they're female. Nice and easy. This is pretty simple, as long as you can keep in mind what the question indicates, which is the dominant allele versus the recessive allele. That will inform when you see your pedigree, if you've, or not, excuse me, not pedigree, but your Punnett squares, if you feel like drawing them. The offspring that come out of that, depending on which of the alleles are dominant versus recessive, is going to determine the ratios of offspring that have specific phenotypes. So just take your time with these questions, read them, and try your best to write out as much information as you can so you don't get lost in the question. Let's zoom out for this. Hey. Hey. Okay, so moving on to pedigrees. In this pedigree, we are looking at tooth agenesis in humans. So severe tooth agenesis, defined as the absence of 6 or more teeth, is less common and is frequently an inherited condition. We can see the pedigree below of a Finnish family that exhibit tooth agenesis. What is the most likely method of inheritance in this pedigree? Pause the video to try it yourself, and let's go through and try to decipher. So we can see right away that there is not a skipping of generations. That's very commonly recessive when we see a skipping of generations. In this case, every affected individual has at least one affected parent. These 2 are crossed out maybe because they didn't have the information. Yeah, every affected individual has at least one affected parent, disregarding the first generation. Yep, these guys come from this. So we can assume that it's dominant rather than recessive. And actually, I think I can just introduce this right now. I think the answer is, actually, you know what, let's not do that. So we have a dominant, most likely dominant method of inheritance. It's either dominant or possibly including a Y linkage. So we can determine whether or not it's Y linked very easily, whether or not every male that is affected passes on the trait to every one of their male offspring. And we can very quickly see that this affected male does not pass it on to their affected son. And if it were Y linked, this XY individual would pass on their Y chromosome to this individual for this individual here to even become male in the first place. They would need the Y from their male parent. And so it's obviously not Y-linked because this individual, despite getting the Y chromosome from their father, did not inherit tooth agenesis. So we now have narrowed it down to autosomal dominant or X-linked dominant. How can we determine which is which? I think we should maybe even look at this situation here. So we have individual from generation 2, number 8, and this individual is an affected male. So let's say that, or let's not say that, let's go through the possibility that this is X-linked dominant. If this were X-linked dominant, then this individual would have, let me get out the pen. This individual would have capital X. I'm going to stop drawing my X's like that. It's kind of confusing. Sorry. So this individual would have XY, and this individual who is unaffected would have lowercase x, lowercase x. This is capital and these are lowercase because this female is unaffected and this is X-linked dominant. So X-linked dominant. Obviously, dominant would overpower the recessive. So for this female who has two X chromosomes, that's how they're female in the first place, for them to be unaffected, they couldn't have a dominant X allele in the case of X-linked dominant inheritance because then they would be affected. So we see that this falls apart really quickly because this individual who is a male and is affected passes on their Y chromosome to this individual, their offspring, their male offspring. For this individual to be a male in the first place, they have some kind of X and a Y. For them to be this male, they'd need to acquire their Y chromosome from their father. But they're affected. So they'd have to have this X chromosome, but this isn't possible because their mother would have to contribute their X chromosome, and their mother does not have the dominant tooth agenesis allele. So we see right away with this example that it is not X-linked dominant, but rather it is autosomal dominant. Sorry for my handwriting. I'm writing with my left hand. And I'm not left-handed. So we have autosomal dominant inheritance, and I will introduce it now. Don't rely on this flowchart, but if you can memorize or not memorize, but understand the pathway of this, kind of like I just showed you, then you can easily nail every pedigree, no problem. And we can follow the path that I did. We see that, or we look at a pedigree and see whether or not there is a skipping of generations or a sequence of generations, whether or not an affected individual, has one affected parent. So affected individuals have one affected parent. If yes, then it was dominant or Y-linked, like we said. And if not, it's recessive. And then right away, I like to decide whether or not there's that very specific male to every male offspring. And that helps me to eliminate or corroborate a Y-linked trait. But before you do that, you could also actually, that's a little less clear. You can follow this chart or do it my way, but yeah, you can do various steps to determine whether or not it's X-linked dominant. And this was the trick that I used for this situation here, because, well, actually, not really, but if we did this trick here, where affected males pass the trait on to all daughters, let's explain this. So in the case of X-linked dominance, if it were X-linked dominant, then this male who is capital XY, I told you I'd stop doing it, but I lied. this individual is XY and this is XX. This individual, this female offspring of these two, would have to have, their mother gives them, they can only give them a lowercase x. But for them to be female, they'd have to have two X chromosomes because, female mammals, for example, in this human example, female mammals have two X chromosomes, they're homogametic. So the father, for this individual to be female in the first place, would have to receive the X from their father and would therefore be affected. And that is what this stipulation was getting at, whether or not males pass on the trait to all of their affected daughters. So you can explore this, try your best not to just memorize it cold, and try to be able to find your way through a pedigree using these kinds of tricks. So follow-up question, if individual 4-2 mated with a male that had a full set of teeth, what proportion of their children should have tooth agenesis? I always put the pen away for some reason. So if individual 4-2 mated with a male that had a full set of teeth, they were not affected by tooth agenesis, what proportion of their children should have tooth agenesis? So this female, we have established that this is autosomal dominant. And so we can assign some letter. Let's say that the alleles for this are capital and lowercase t, where capital T is for tooth agenesis, and lowercase t is normal, having the normal or full amount of teeth. And so we know that this female is T something. Actually, let's not assume it's something. This individual would have to be TT because they're unaffected and it's autosomal, so we don't have to worry about X's and Y's. And this individual is T something. But we know that because this individual can only give a lowercase t, then this individual has at least one lowercase t, but they are affected, so they have the uppercase t. And this individual is not affected at all, so they also have lowercase t, lowercase t. Oh, maybe I should have explained that. So yeah, if you're going through a pedigree, it's easiest to work from the most recent individuals to the most ancient individuals. And that's because, we see traits and we can compare based on their parents what this individual even had on offer or what was even available to them from their parents. So, for example, this individual, they are affected, so they have at least one affected allele. We know this for sure in the case of both 3-7 and 3-8. And so their parents have one affected, or they are affected, so they also have to have at least one affected allele. But this individual is entirely unaffected from this dominant trait, so they have to be homozygous recessive. They can't have any dominant alleles, otherwise they would be affected. And so because this individual can only give one kind of allele, the normal teeth allele, then they definitely pass this on to both of their children. This is the only thing they can pass on. So individual 3-7 and 3-8 would be heterozygotes. And so you can just work from any individual upwards. Let's practice an unaffected individual. So this unaffected individual, actually, that's not really fair. We know that they're going to be lowercase c, lowercase t. Yeah, but actually that helps us to establish, I'm going to not write in red, there's so much red on the screen. That helps us to establish the genotype of their parent. So this individual is obviously lowercase t because they're unaffected from this dominant trait. And their parent is also unaffected. But so it's obvious that unaffected parent would pass on an unaffected allele. However, this parent is affected, but passes on an unaffected allele. So they are obviously they are going to be heterozygous. because they're affected, they have the dominant allele, but their offspring was unaffected entirely, and therefore they would have had to give this lowercase t allele. Oh yeah, so back to the question. We know that I'm going to switch it up one more time with the colors, I'm sorry. So we have T, T, and I'm just going to erase it instead of harming your eyeballs. This, oh no. Please let me draw, thank you. So this individual is going to be TT, and this one we have established is TT. So what proportion of their children should have tooth agenesis? We can do this cross very quickly. Female on top. That's, I'm going to rewrite it, sorry. Hopefully you can hear me. TT and the male who had a full set of teeth, they were unaffected. So the female passes on one gamete of capital, one gamete of lowercase. The male can only pass on lowercase because they're unaffected. And so we see that because it's autosomal dominant, any dominant allele, capital T, is going to have tooth agenesis. So we see the capital T here and capital T here. That is 2 out of 4 total individuals. And therefore, 50% of the children of individual 4-2 and 4-3, who's unrelated, are going to have tooth agenesis. Awesome. So I will move on to the next topic. Thank you for hanging out with me.